Welcome, hello to you on this special day. It is indeed Mother's Day, so a big shout out to all our mothers out there. We honour you, we love you, we appreciate all that you do, and I do hope that you're being thoroughly spoilt today. I'm obviously thrilled to be bringing you this message today. So I want us to take a moment to think about potentially our wider family. Apart from our mothers, obviously who we love, is there anybody particularly in your family that you are fond of, that is maybe entertaining, that family gatherings aren't quite the same without them? Or is there maybe a family member that you kind of thought it was a little bit of a gift when you weren't able to gather together over Christmases? Maybe they're a bit difficult, maybe there's not much conversation that flows when they're around. But anyhow, families are interesting, aren't they? All shapes and sizes, and no family is perfect. I say my family's not perfect, I'm in it. That's one of the reasons. But my daughter and I were talking the other day, and we were talking about a family member, and we have had permission to share this, saying that, we've started to notice how difficult this family member is, and they're quite demanding. They seem to only want affection on their terms, constantly hungry, pestering for food all the time, sleeps for extraordinary amounts of time. Sometimes they can be heard snoring. Not really on friendly terms with the neighbours. In fact, there's a couple of times I've had to intervene in some fights that they've been getting into with the local residents. And if I'm honest with you, they're starting to exhibit some predatory behaviour. I don't know if you've guessed who that might be in the family. It is not your senior pastor, Johnny, just to reassure you. But it is indeed our wonderful, fluffy, delightful cat, Whisper. And many of you may have seen some images over the last few weeks of her, but she's indeed an integral part of our family. I would hazard a guess there is a pecking order in our family, but she's slightly there on the top, although we would probably argue differently. But she's definitely altered the dynamics of our family, and you know what, we love her to bits, faults and all. I would say that I'm really her mummy. She is my fur baby. Any of you that have fur babies out there, but I don't know if you're a dog or a cat person, but you do know the differences that animals and pets can come into your family. And so today the title of my message for Mother's Day is Mother Knows Best, and I want us to look at a particular family in the Old Testament, and unfortunately about a mother who completely overplayed her hand, who, really wanting the best for one of her sons, became so misguided in her actions that she kind of went beyond God to force an outcome that eventually cost her dearly. And the family is Isaac and Rebekah, and indeed about their two sons, their twin boys, Jacob and Esau. Now, Rebekah comes from the Hebrew word Rivka, which means captivating or to snare. And we first meet her back in Genesis 24, so one of the very first books of the Bible. And here she's coming to draw water from a well. But just to give you a bit of context before that, you'll see that Abraham and Sarah, who are indeed the parents of Isaac, Abraham's getting on a bit in years, and unfortunately he's lost his wife Sarah. She's around, I think, about 127 when she dies. So they get quite advanced in years, and I think he's looking now to secure a future for his son Isaac. And he instructs his chief servant, and he has a conversation with him and says, look, I need you to go and find a wife for my son Isaac. Now, he's probably very mindful of the promise that God spoke to him, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars. And he says to him, so I want you to go out, and he gives him specific instructions of the type of woman that he wants for his son. And the servant takes this task really seriously, and he prays to God, and he says, I really want you to grant me success, Lord, and I need you to really confirm, because how am I going to know, if I meet a young woman, if this is the right woman? And so he asks God to give him a really specific sign. He says, and when I come to a well and I ask for water, if the woman then offers me water, but then she in turn offers to water my camels, that's the woman that I must take back to my master for his son to be married to. And the scripture says, before the servant had even finished praying, his prayer was answered, and there Rebekah appeared. I don't know about you, but I would want a lot of my prayers to be answered like that, instantly, almost like the microwave prayers, instantaneously. But you'll also see in this story that there has been times when you have to wait as Isaac and Rebekah did for prayers to be answered. But nevertheless, here he is now. The servant has met with Rebekah. And as I said, as her name suggests, she is beautiful. She's indeed strong. She's from within their own people, because Abraham was very specific. He was insistent that he didn't want his son marrying a woman from the pagan people on the land. And her actions at the well showed her to be thoughtful and kind and generous and really having a servant heart. And after giving the servant a drink, she indeed offers to water the servant's camels. I don't know how much you know about camels. Most of us would know that camels can survive long periods of time, can't they, in the desert without water. And contrary to the sort of myth that it is the humps that they carry their water in, it's not. It's actually the fat reserves that are in there that means that they can go for long periods of time without water, and certainly obviously when there's times of famine and they're in the desert. But also, not only can they go without water for long periods of time, when they do drink water, they drink an awful lot. It's thought to be around 30 gallons at one sitting. And you'll see from the story that the servant took along with him 10 camels. So I started to do my maths. I thought 10 times 30. That's like 300 gallons of water that these camels would be drinking at any one sitting. And probably the jar that Rebekah had with her that she'd be gathering the water from was probably only about 5 gallons that she would be able to carry at any one time. So that is a lot of back and forth. I think hence the reason why I think she was a strong and capable woman, being able to water so many camels. But great start for the servant, isn't it? It's like, yes, she's the one. And you see, this relationship between Isaac and Rebekah is really a forerunner to the relationship between Jesus and his church. You see, Isaac is the only son, the only recognised son, if you like, of Abraham. And to really understand that, go back into Genesis 22 and read what God says to Abraham about Isaac. We know that Isaac is his much loved son, and he was willing to be so obedient to God and offer him up as a sacrifice. Isaac now is indeed looking for a suitable bride. And that's parallel, isn't it, really? If you think about Jesus being the only begotten Son of God, who was indeed offered up as a sacrifice and went through that sacrifice for each and every one of us. And we often hear that Jesus is described as the bridegroom, and he is indeed looking for his church, the bride of Christ. And so what a great start to this story. But where I want to pick up from and specifically read from is Genesis 25, because you see then the servant does take Rebekah back, and they are indeed married. I'm going to read from a couple of verses just from Genesis 25 from verse 21. It says this, so this is after they're married, and it's Isaac is about 40 years old now. He says, Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. And the Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. But the babies jostled each other within her, and she said, why is this happening to me? And so she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. And when the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. And after this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. And so he was named Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. And the boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of open country, while Jacob was a quiet man, staying among the tents. And Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, he loved Esau. But Rebekah loved Jacob. So you see, completely in contrast to that servant's prayer, they had to wait around 20 years for their promise of their children. And in faith, they prayed and asked God to bless them. And I started, obviously being familiar with some of the story from Abraham and Sarah, thinking, it's a bit like history repeating itself here. They're apparently appearing barren. But thankfully, they did not resort to the same approach as Abraham and Sarah to try and force children and descendants. But there is indeed, isn't there, a prophecy over these 2 babies, these twins, about their future and symbolically what they would represent. 2 nations divided and against one another. Esau representing the Edomites, and Isaac, Israel and the Israelites. And you see the first one, he's named after his physical appearance, his redness, whereas the second one is more called after his behaviour. Grasping his brother's heel, or in some interpretations, mean to figuratively deceive. And you'll see that play out a little bit longer later on in this story. But you get an image. Now, I'm a twin. I'm the eldest. I was born 10 minutes prior to my sister. And normally there's an interval between when twins are born. But you get this image here, how the younger is following closely, is coming out almost attached to his elder brother. He's in eager pursuit upon the heel of the elder brother. And that kind of displays some of the behaviour that you will see later on in this story. But for today, I would just like to bring out 4, I suppose, key issues that I've identified that start to play out with this family. And they are favouritism, fear and control, secrecy and disunity, and their poor role modelling. The first one, if we take favouritism, we've seen it right from the outset, that it appears that both parents have one, if you like, favourite child more than the other. I always say to my daughter, oh, you're my favourite daughter. And she's like, but I'm your only daughter. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. So sometimes having one, it's not hard just to have, if you like, a favourite. But here already, one is being more favoured over the other with each parent. And I don't know, maybe Rebekah's heart went to Jacob. Could it be that her husband wasn't exactly subtle about his preference towards his elder son? Maybe he had an affinity there, the sharing of the love of wild game, the fact he had a son who was athletic and he was a hunter and he was able to go out and kill that game for him and bring it home to cook and eat. And then maybe he didn't really have as much connection with Jacob, who we described as a quieter one. It says he stayed near the tents, which probably suggests he looked after the sheep. But you see, there's a danger when you have favouritism, particularly actually within families, because it can lead to resentment. No doubt you'll start to see the sibling rivalry that takes place. There is definitely an imbalance of an attention. Some people would end up finding they're more neglected. One might have more low self-esteem, whereas the other has a sense of entitlement. You might get one that's trying to get the approval of a parent that they feel doesn't love them as much. And then you start to see a pattern of proving oneself and people pleasing. This most definitely, even with children, as you grow into adulthood, can impact your behaviours, your decisions and your choices. But I want us to think on this as well in terms of all the relationships that we have, particularly those that maybe we have authority over or that we are, if you like, in charge of or an influence over. You know, fostering favouritism in the workplace does bring about conflict. It can create competition and division and a sense of unfairness. So I want us to think about that in the context of all the relationships, not necessarily just family. But you see, Jacob, the youngest, he was only too aware of what the entitlement of the firstborn child would have. Even with twins, he would be entitled as the firstborn, it says, to a double portion of the family inheritance, and no doubt would end up being the future leader of the family. And you've got two polar opposites here. They're so unalike in character. I mean, the eldest, if you think about it, had a total disregard, really, for his birthright. You see him later on going and sort of selling it for a bowl of stew to his brother. He was very impulsive. He was disobedient. He married a Hittite woman against his parents' wishes. I mean, much like his grandfather, Abraham was insistent. He wanted his son to marry a woman from their own people. And that very much would have been the same with Isaac and Rebekah. But oh no, Esau decided that he would go and marry a Hittite woman. It actually says, much to the displeasure, it caused a great source of grief to those parents. But the younger, you see, maybe he was less brawn and more intelligent, but indeed he was manipulative. He was very deceiving to his brother. And I think he took advantage of when his brother was coming in tired from being out in the field, that trying to get what he wanted by saying, well, I'll sell your birthright to me for a bowl of stew. And he was desperate, wasn't he, to have what his brother would get. But still, these are both the sons of Isaac and Rebekah. And so the second one is around fear and control. And to give it a little bit more, bring it to life, let me, if you turn the page over to Genesis 27, let me read to you a little bit more about what happens in this family. So fear and control. So it says this: when Isaac was old, and by this time he's about 137 years old, and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for his older son Esau and said to him, "My son." "Here I am," he answered. "Isaac, I am now an old man, and I don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me some kind of tasty food I like and bring it to me so that I might give it to you and I'll give my blessing before I die." Now Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to Esau, and when Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah then said to her son Jacob, "Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die.' Now, my son," she said, "listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats so that I may prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat so that he may give you his blessing before he dies." Let me just pause for a moment there, because I encourage you to read this story. I mean, we think that there's drama and division and maybe brothers at odds with William and Harry, but it's nothing compared to what you read in this story. But you see here, Rebekah overhears a conversation between her husband and her eldest son. And at that point, I really think she allows fear to creep in. And perhaps she's going back on that prophecy, that promise that God spoke before the boys were born, that the older would serve the younger. And she's probably thinking, "Isaac, you're about to muck everything up." And this is the mistake that she makes. She begins then, she uses her initiative. She starts to think on her feet, but she starts to plot and plan. And she starts to interfere and intervene, taking matters into her own hands. And you'll read in this story, she goes to extraordinary lengths. Jacob actually, even though he is manipulative and I believe he's intelligent, he's actually quite obedient, because she says to him, "Right, you've got to do exactly as I say." And he does. She says to him, "Right, I want you to go and dress up in your brother's clothes. I'll make a meal that we can pass off as if he's hunted it and he's cooked it. You go and dress up in your brother's clothes, because then when you come close to your father, he might think that you're your brother because you'll smell like him." She gets some goat skin and she puts it over his arms so that when the father, who is obviously losing his sight, starts to feel his arms, it's like, "Yes, this is my son Esau." And she leads her youngest son to deceive not only his father and brother, but to take that blessing that ordinarily he shouldn't have had. You see, Rebekah's strengths and her resourcefulness and the initiative that actually was part of her attractiveness, not just her physical beauty when we first meet her, and we saw displayed so well when she came and met the servant, starts to be taken too far. She overplays it, and she resorts now in doing something so wrong to desperately try and bring about the promise of God, how she thinks it should be playing out. But here's the thing, God never said how he would do it, did he? He never actually gave the exact details. And there's a warning here, I think, for 2 types of people. I don't know if there's anybody that maybe like Rebekah, you're very resourceful, you're capable, perhaps you've got influence. Capable and influential people need to be really careful to resist the urge to step in. I don't know if we've got any fixers out there, that most people come to you because they know that you can sort things, you'll fix things, but you've got to resist the urge not to get involved and to try and fix and orchestrate and arrange. You may have the power, you may have the ability, you may even have the networks and connections, or even the financial means to change circumstances and make things happen. But you've got to take your hands off, and you must allow God to work in his way and his timing. And the second warning goes out for those that maybe are anxious and fearful. Don't let your anxiety and fear about a situation cause you then also to take matters into your own hands, however valid they may feel to you. Philippians 4 tells us, isn't it? Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition and thanksgiving, present your requests to God. You see, the end never justifies the means. We must never force an outcome because we think that something should be happening. We must wait and trust on God. Do you know what? Most time, fear comes about in 2 forms. It's either someone that's been afraid of losing something they already have, or it's someone being afraid of not getting something that they want. Fear and control. The third one is secrecy and disunity. Now, it is Mother's Day, so we're not about to just bash all mothers, and it's certainly, I'm looking at this family, the father, Isaac, isn't without, if you like, blame. He's certainly accountable for causing some of this issue. You see, normally a father's blessing like this would be done publicly in front of the family and the local community. But here you see he's starting to take his eldest son, isn't he, to one side in private. And maybe his bias and his favour of his eldest son, but also the other sort of concern about his advancement in years. As I said, he was thought to be around 137 years old. But the ironic thing is he does live for another 43 years. Isaac doesn't actually die until he's about 185. But maybe that's the motivator. He feels like he's running out of time. And so he goes again himself outside of God's promise, forcing some of the situation. Had Rebekah not overheard, you do start to think, would she have not known until after he blessed Esau? And when I read and reread that, I looked at it and thought, I wonder if Rebekah had to make a habit of that. It says she was listening. Wonder if she had to regularly eavesdrop into conversation to find out what her husband was doing. Maybe, she's blindsided because she thinks that she's doing everyone a favour, that she's actually preventing a disaster from happening. And you see, the couple that we see at the beginning when they married, the united front when they were praying for the blessing of children, should have continued definitely throughout their marriage and also when they had children. Together they should be trusting God's word, but also each other. And then the final one really, which leading up to, is just the poor role modelling. It's so important that children, young people have role models, positive role models. Here you've got a couple, a family that model sort of favouritism, competition, deception, even division within that family, being impatient. I mean, it's no good, is it, us as parents saying to our children, you've got to trust in the Lord, you must wait on God, and then they see that we don't do that ourselves. There's definitely cultivation of distrust. And one of the disappointing things I see when you see this story play out is the lack of admission from Rebekah to Jacob, bearing in mind that you think that Jacob would be led by his mother, to say, do you know what? Seeing that Esau, when he finds out that his brother has taken his blessing from his father, he's so distraught, he's heartbroken, not even admitting, do you know what? I've done a grief wrong here for my oldest son, and I've brought my other youngest son into being deceiving to his father and his brother. Doesn't even admit. I'll let you know what happens, what her response is in a short while. But you see, they're both role modelling, aren't they? Division in that household. These boys needed both parents, their mother and their father. Jesus declares that every household divided against itself will not stand. A family can't prosper when it's at odds with one another, unless living in unity and togetherness. And that not just goes to our own immediate families, but our wider family, our church family too. But as I was reading this story and started sort of to flip back into Abraham and Sarah, and then looking at when the boys grow up, Esau and Jacob, and they marry, you start to see a pattern of generational deceit forming. Abraham and Isaac both told their wives to pose as sisters because they were worried about how they would be received when they came into the presence of powerful people. Rebekah, as we see, deceives her husband and causes her younger son to deceive the dad and also his brother. But later on, and you may be familiar with the story where Jacob is tricked into marrying the older sister, Leah, rather than the younger sister. And it's indeed Rebekah's brother Laban that I suppose really sort of tricks his son into marrying the oldest daughter, saying, it's not really custom for us to marry off the younger before the former. I have to be honest, when I now read that story and it's full of context, not sure whether I feel as much sympathy for Jacob as I once may have done. But again, you see it comes back to him. He later on then tricks and deceives his own father-in-law because he does flee secretly away with his two wives and children away from his father-in-law. And then finally, you will see in the story a little bit of good news is the brothers eventually do reconcile. They spent many years apart, but even when the opportunity has it to come together, Jacob goes back on his promise to his eldest brother that he will follow him to the land of Seir, but instead he goes and builds, it says, a place for himself elsewhere. And I think it's really sad with this story that despite all their efforts, the results were the opposite really of definitely what Rebekah, and indeed probably Jacob hoped for. You see, at the moment when Esau finds out, it's a watershed moment in terms of his relationship with his brother. And it says that he says to himself, he starts to bear a grudge with his brother and he wants to kill him. He said, I'll wait till dad dies, but then I want to go out and kill my brother. And that's where I said to you, the response to that from Rebekah, not realising how distraught her eldest son is, the response she says is to Jacob, listen, I'm going to send you away to my brother. Let's get you out the way a bit until then Esau calms down. There's no admittance, do you know what, we've really done a grievous misharm to the eldest boy. Look at how we've impacted our family. Nothing like that at all. The response is just run away and he'll calm down and then I can send for you back. And you see here, this is the saddest thing for this story, because Rebekah, the much loved son that she has, she forces him to go away. And if you read the story, she never ends up seeing him again. Jacob is now alienated from his father. And you see also Esau tries to then almost appease his dad a little bit, because he then takes a wife from the clan or the people that the parents would approve, because he suddenly realises how displeasing his disobedience, his rebelliousness was when he married a Hittite woman. But the brothers would not see each other for many years. And here you have then a family that started out as together, trusting God, divided and at odds with secrecy and lies. It's quite dysfunctional, really. Obviously a very happy subject on Mother's Day. But like I said, there's no perfect family. You think that they didn't really stand a chance. And yet God was still able to work in it and despite of it. So I just want to leave you with a couple of thoughts as I close this message today. You know what? God doesn't need our help. He doesn't need Louise's help in establishing his plans. You know what? I'll just move things along, Lord, because they're not happening as quick as I'd like. Do you know what he needs from you, from me? He needs our trust. He needs our obedience. He needs us to stand in faith on his word. And you know what? Our ambition and desires for our life, and indeed the people that we care most about, and who can say, parents, we love our children, don't we? They must never permit us to take matters into our own hands, and in particular, ungodly actions. You can't outmaneuver or outwit God. And so we have a choice. Do we try and make our own life and establish our own plans and then ask God to get in and bless our work and can you now come in and bless what I've done? Or do we choose to live under his promise, that covenant promise that he wants to establish with us, to be in agreement, in alignment with us? And so it's not often that I do this. I think I'm going to sort of scribble out that title today, Mother Knows Best. Because really, in truth, I think after reading this story, it is God that knows best. Take care.
Thanks for joining us for the message here at Renewal. We hope you've been inspired, encouraged and challenged by what you've heard, and that it will be of great purpose for you and others. This year we are celebrating Renewal's 50th Jubilee year, which is really exciting for us. To find out how you can get involved, why don't you go to renewalcc.com/50. Yes, that's the big 50. If you'd like to know more about what it means to be a Christian, then why not sign up for our Next Steps program? Go to renewalcc.com/next steps, fill out the contact form and one of our friendly team will be in touch. Don't worry, we won't spam you. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our online channels at YouTube, and also you can stay up to date by going to our Renewal podcast at renewalcc.com/media or searching on Spotify or Apple Podcast. Every Monday we'll release a new episode so you can stay right up to date. Finally, if you like the work we do here, you can donate to Renewal by going to renewalcc.com/give. All donations are gratefully received. Have a blessed week ahead and we will see you soon.